Psychotechnologies Live. Welcome to a very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have with us Mark, aka MarkOfChange. He is a Qigong medical projection therapy practitioner, or what we might call like an energy worker.
Psychotechnologies
from
Live.
the like Japanese, Chinese medicine kind of situation. It's much more nuanced than that. I'm just sort of saying what I think maybe generally people would have access to. Also something about Shiatsu. And he's got a background in Reiki. I met Mark at a business meeting thing, which was pretty cool. And then I was just like talking to him and I'm like, oh, this seems like a cool guy. You should come on the show. And then we met, I think 3 weeks ago around, and
it's some magic.
I did some work on me. I was having some like really bad
neck
pain.
Yeah, you want to talk about that when we get into it? I want to hear how you're doing.
Yeah, so you pretty much, so like I had the neck pain, which was like a result of my neck like bending essentially. Like I couldn't straighten my neck. It was just like bent over the whole time. And this is like something that happens to me sometimes where I just like kind of wake up like that. And yeah, you and then like me spending like a couple hours like kind of sitting with the changes, kind of just like it just made it all go away, which was nuts.
Woohoo!
So
you got change. Excellent.
Yeah, I got major change. So
that's what I'm all about. Oddly enough, Mark of change, right?
Yeah, Mark of change.
Mark of staying the same. Who's going to work with Mark of staying the same?
Yeah, it was a very weird, intense situation, because like I didn't really know what you were doing the whole time. Like I saw some of the stuff, but like mostly I don't know what's going on. So that was pretty intense, and it was like a very radical change. Like it was my neck was like bent over, and then it wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
And then I could like have that range of motion, and then there was just the muscle pain that just went away after a couple of days.
Yeah. And range of motion changes are so effective because literally the person who, when they can only lift their arm to here, and then you do something and now they can lift their arm to here, it's like, wait a second. Literally a moment ago it hurt to lift my arm up to there, and now I can lift it up to there. I actually have a recording of myself being the subject. And literally in the recording, I am like, my mouth is hanging open. I'm like looking at my arm going, it's up over my head, and my shoulder doesn't hurt. And that wasn't the case 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, that was crazy. It was very intense. I'm kind of sweating a little bit thinking about it. Like it's the whole situation makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But it is real, and it's reality. It's good to like face it.
Yeah.
Not deny it.
Yeah. Well, that tells us something about the next level, right?
Yeah, like there's definitely a piece of reality that I'm missing given that you can do that. Or at least that's like my hypothesis now. Like I have some evidence.
Let me just check this. So Daniel, you're describing that you couldn't perceive what he was doing as he was doing it, and then he did it and you felt better. And so there's like a piece of reality that Daniel just isn't attuned to, isn't aware of, that you're like, oh, maybe one day I'll be able to like do those things myself. Is that right?
I'm not quite at that stage. I'm still in the like, it's creepy, and just like kind of trying to like acclimate to like there's this part of the world that I don't understand that other people can see. So there's just like a certain amount of like just like being calm and not reacting badly to that. And then I'll get to like more of the curiosity and trying to master.
Okay, so talking about other parts of the world, or parts of the world that other people can see that you can't. We're here for meridians, right?
Okay, so yeah, so there's a bunch of things going on. So I want to you're trying to push it forward. I see Mark is like very excited and like something, and I don't
also, you gotta you may have to guide me, and you may have to reel me in if you get me talking. So
okay.
Yeah, I totally, let's
so let me
keep
just
the focus as best we can until we're totally off the rails, and then maybe that's interesting and we follow it, and maybe we have to come back. I don't know. Let's see.
Sure. Yeah. So so essentially like this stuff is like the Japanese systems. They do meridians, which I had learned in school that meridians aren't real. And now
That's what they teach in schools these
I live
days.
in a different world, so maybe they are real. I don't know. So I guess like for me is like it's like not like don't like sit and convince me that they're real, but like maybe like you sharing your journey of like how you went from someone who maybe didn't know what they were or perceive them or this whole world. Like how did you get into it in a way
I mean,
that
maybe I can ask Mark the question. Was there ever
like
a
a
time when
human?
you didn't think meridians were real?
Well, let's look at it this way. There was certainly a time when somebody said your lung meridian was off, and I was like, my lung what? What are you talking about? Right? And so yes, there very certainly was. So to answer your question about how I got into it, right? So go back 35 years, give or take, right? Nerdy computer geek, spending a lot of time on the keyboard, in front of the soldering iron. I built my own computer when I was in grade 11 because I didn't have access to a computer as often as I wanted. So I got all the chips and, built it, right? So nerdy and, out with the magnifying glass and the soldering iron and doing all the things. And fast forward into the early 20s university time frame, I spent a lot of time in the computer room, right? Hunched over looking at terminals, right? So I find myself at a psychic fair. And one of the things in the psychic fair was this Japanese Shiatsu 10-minute treatment, see how you feel, right? And so lie down on the table or sit on the chair, right? And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, it was like probably $2 a minute, so maybe $20, right? I'm like, yeah, I could take that for 10 minutes, right? So I lay down on the table, right? And Donna worked on me, and I, got up from that, and I was like lightheaded, and my neck could move, my shoulders could move, and I was like, wow, this is really, really different. Okay, I didn't know that
Surprise.
shoulders moved like that and neck moved like that. Like, wow, I'm used to those being like all painful. Like, what the heck, right? And so I wandered around the show for another couple hours, and I came back and I'm like, that first round, that was pretty good. Like, I think I need to go for round 2, right? And Donna was like, maybe that's a little too much for your first time. Like, maybe you should temper that. And I'm like, nah, I'm going both feet, right? And so once I convinced them that I wasn't going to be driving anytime soon and that I could handle, I did round 2, and I literally was walking around the show then going, oh, look, upper spine moves too. Like, wow, this is really kind of interesting, right? And so I started seeing Donna regularly and getting treatments. I learned the fine art of tapping the mat to get their attention when they were working on points that were so intense I no longer had the ability to speak or breathe. And it's kind of like you're on the wrestling mat, or you need to tap out because you can't speak. I definitely was in those, right? And Donna, who, she's 100 pounds soaking wet, holding bags of lead, tiny person, she'd be working on me, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, that really hurts, and that's intense. And she'd be like, yeah, but I'm not even started. Like, look at how much further I can go, right? And then I'm like tapping out because I can't actually speak, right? Because it was so intense, and it just showed me the side of my body that I had been ignoring, right? And I hadn't been paying attention to. And so that really started building my curiosity of how do I get into these arts more, right? Because I'd had a physical, I hadn't been able to move my neck, and now I could move my neck, and you did that in 10 minutes. How did that come to pass, right? And somewhere in there, I'd been aware of energetics. I'd been aware of psychic goods. What was that? Name of that movie was the beginning of the original Ghostbusters, right? So the beginning of the original Ghostbusters, one of the Ghostbusters is researching and they are holding up the so-called psychic cards, right? And they're saying to the subject, is that a circle, square, triangle, squiggle, right? And then they're not always researchers doing this, right? But they're electroshocking the person when they get it wrong, right? To try to encourage. But it turns out that if you're the correct gender, then you're allowed to get it wrong and not get shocked. And if you're the wrong for the researchers' purposes, gender, then you get shocked even when you get it right, because he's really enjoying encouraging the girl and discouraging the guy, right? And so I'd seen that, and I was like, so there's something to this. Like, they have these cards, right? And we messed around with some of those in high school, and then I got into it further. And I had gone for some training on a Japanese art called Reiki, right? And so Reiki is the idea of hands-on healing. And although Usui Sensei might never describe it this simply, one of the ways that I describe it now, when people are like, but how real is that? And I'm like, well, take an average person.
Real?
Yeah, real, right? So take an average person that has no knowledge and none of the terminology and none of the experience, and watch what happens when they hit their thumb with the hammer, right? So they're putting up a thumbtack in the wall, right? And they schwack it and they miss and they hit their thumb. And how many of them, first thing they do is they grab the thing they hit, right? Feel free to replace thumb with whatever other body part they smacked instead, right? And then they sit there, right? And they're putting conscious awareness on it. And this is one of my examples that hands-on healing is something that at some level, the human condition knows how to do. Even if at a conscious level, we can't describe it.
We have
right?
a desire
You
to
look
be
at
the thing that's hurting.
Yeah, right? You look at somebody that trips and falls, right? And wherever they banged up their body, you know where they did because they're holding it, right? There's something that comes from that exchange of attention, pressure, energy, right? And there are ways to get better at that, right? And so that's where, either self-discovery that, and that's how Usui is described as having learned Reiki. He had the idea that something was there, and he hiked into the mountains and he did a fasting ritual and days of work, and he was frustrated. He wasn't getting where he wanted to, right? And so he gave up, and he was hiking out and he stubbed his toe, right? And when he hit his toe, and then he sat down and he was working on his sore toe, and then he got connected with the energies, right? And that's literally an abridged, forgive me if I've forgotten some massively critical detail in the story, but the basics are that that's when he became aware of those energies, right? And then built on those, built ritual around those, built symbols around those, built ways to teach people, to so-called attune people to being in those energy flows, right? And so that builds skill and capabilities. But it started with tripped and fall, hit the toe, grabbed it with the hand, right? And so for me, that awareness, just like my computer geeky shoulder, neck being sore, really brought awareness to a couple of minutes and something changes, right? And I can feel the change. I couldn't move my head without pain. Now I move my head without pain. Okay, so you took out the screwdriver and loosened the nut that was a little too tight, and all of a sudden it moved, right? Except it's inside the body, and there was no ratchet set. I didn't need a screwdriver. I didn't take my WD-40 and just spray it in there and get it moving, right? And so that really got me interested in learning more. And so then as I said, I had been seeing Donna for regular treatments and noticed bodily changes for myself, right? Health changes. And I was like, oh, I need to learn more. So I was living in Kitchener, Waterloo of Ontario, Canada at the time. And I was looking around, right? What's going on? What's going on? And there was a fellow who was teaching a 1-day class through the school board, right? And you could come and learn Shiatsu in 1 day. And I'm like, the person that I received treatments from, they had a 2,200-hour program,
Ugh.
right? Like, how can I learn this in a day? Like, what am I going to learn, right? And so I went to that day, and the instructor started off, it's very funny. We have this idea in physical terms of crawl before you walk, walk before you run, right? And it's generally the idea that most people that don't know how to walk are going to do well when they try running, right? Because they're going to fall flat on their face, right? Just like if you're not good at crawling and falling, then when you try to stand and fall, it's not going to be so good, right? Well, literally, our instructor guided us through how to crawl, how to get on our hands and knees, how to shift our body weight, right? And how to crawl around the room. And then the second part is he had us partner up with people, and he's like, okay, so just lay your hands flat on the person, right? And as you're crawling on them, shifting your weight, notice, do you find a spot that's hotter? Do you find a spot that's colder? Leave one hand where it's hotter, move the other hand around where it's colder, and now just be. Just keep your weight and be. One hand where it's hotter and one hand where it's colder. And then a couple moments later, move around. Oh, look, the warmer spots cooled down and the cooler spots warmed up. Back to crawling. Work on the person. Find another spot that's hot and another spot that's cold, and then just be. Keep the body weight, right? Alternate a little bit back and forth between those points and shift it. And in 1 day, he had us doing a very simple form of Shiatsu, right?
Wow.
So Shiatsu translates, it's from the Japanese arts, and it translates as finger pressure, right? And there's much more principles to it, but the idea is that you're using your body weight to affect the pressure on the person. And so what Junji was teaching us in that first course was just how to crawl, how to use a flat palm, right? You're not going to put too much pressure on any one point. You're not going to wear yourself out. You don't have to learn like how to literally, when you do Shiatsu, you let go of all the muscles in the hand. You completely relax the hand, right? Because then you can do it all day and your muscles don't get tired. Because I'm leaning, right? I'm using body pressure. But in that 1 day, Junji was teaching us how to feel hot and cold, right? How to move our body weight and work on people. And that really, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm learning how to do the Shiatsu stuff, right? And so I learned Reiki. I knew about energy and just holding on the body. And now with the Shiatsu, I was learning about how to balance and change what's going on in the body, right? And so, of course, I went to research, right? It's like, oh my God, where can I learn more about this? And that's when I was talking to Donna, who I had first been receiving from. I said, well, where did you learn? And Donna was like, oh, I learned from a bunch of different places. I mean, my actual certification is from this one school that has a 2,200-hour program. But I also learned from several other places, and then I made up my own mind about what's going to work. And I'm like, okay, so what you're telling me is there's no one place to learn everything. Like, no, there's no one place to learn everything. And so I tried. I went to that school and I did their intro course. They offered a 100 hours weekends, are you interested in committing to 2,200 hours of training? And I was aware of Reiki, and I was aware of the first person who taught us how to crawl and feeling hot and cold. And so I was like, when do we get to energy? Like we're learning all these points, we're doing all these sequences, right? Where it's like, 6 points from the shoulder to the elbow and 8 points from the elbow to the wrist. And we're learning these patterns, right? We're learning about these things called meridians. We're taping or using marker and marking people to try to learn and memorize where all these points on the body are. But when do we learn more about the energy and doing these things with energy? And I didn't get a lot of answers. No one really wanted to talk about it. And finally, my last weekend at that school, finishing my 100-hour program, one of the instructors overheard me ask this question. And she kind of pulled me aside and she's like, why do you know to ask that? Why do you know about energy? And I'm like, oh, well, I've done this Reiki work. I've studied with Junji. And she's like, oh, yeah. So, and she got real quiet, right? And she's checking who's around, right? She's like, yeah, this school never gets there. 2,200 hours later, they never talk about energy.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, now they do some really intense learnings. They have more learnings on anatomy than the Shiatsu school that I graduated from, than my entire Shiatsu school training, right? Like they do a ton of learning westernized anatomy, right? And so if they're interacting with a Western medical practitioner and someone puts out the name of a thing, right? Like the name of a body part and the name of a condition, right? Graduates of that school know backwards and forwards. They know what it is. They've spent a bunch of time on it. Yeah. But they also are not so energetically aware, right? And so they're not working from an energy perspective. And so the instructor that heard me asking about this is like, oh, you need to go study with Ted. I was like, oh, who's Ted? Right. And I found out many years later that Ted and Junji studied together in Japan at the same school. Right. It was not a coincidence that they both were energetically inclined and worked from an energetic perspective, because they both worked and studied from the same school in Japan. Right. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's why those line up. Oh, look at that. They have a common history. Right.
I'm left with this question of like, is there a reason that this school doesn't do the energy, or like, why do you think that is? And also, I want you to keep going with this amazing story.
Yeah. So, that's a really good question, right? I actually did hear a rumor running about that the founder in quieter moments was heard to say that he didn't believe in meridians. Right. And that, he definitely got change, right? Like he had a caricature in the hallway of the school, and it was 3 steps, right? Find screaming point, hold, patient asleep. Right. And so he loved, like, his first day showing us anything, right? He had novice students take their elbows, right, and put it into the sacrum, the butt muscles of a student, right, and had her flailing. She had arms and legs moving, going, oh my God, right? And then afterwards, like, how's that feel, right? And she was like, oh, well, all right, now that you're done, I guess that does feel better. And he's like, yeah, see how beneficial this is?
That sounds like trigger points.
So so it's really interesting. Some people have seen me work and they're like, oh my God, Mark, you know all your pressure points, or you know all your trigger points. And I'm like, no, I don't. I have a terrible memory.
I just know when I hit the spot.
No, actually, it's I do know when I hit the spot, but it's how to find where that spot is. Often now I can guide someone or poke at someone, right, before I touch them. Right. Like I was at an event in Montreal, right? And I'm talking to one person and her friend walks into the room and is clearly frustrated that that I'm still talking to the friend and they're not going to whatever they're going to next. Right. And the way they're standing, right? I look over. What's that?
She's a bad wingman.
Yeah, there you go. Right. All right. And so I look over and I'm like, what's going on? right? And the person's like, what do you mean, what's going on? I'm like, with your shoulder? And she's like, what? And I'm like, right there. And she's like, how do you know that? And I'm like, because I can feel it from over here, right? And she's like, you what? And I'm like, do you want it to change? And she's like, I don't know, right? And her friend who I've been talking to is like, come over here. You should let him work on you, right? And she's like, what? And I'm like, okay, so turn around, right? And I'm like, all right, so is this the point on the back where you feel it? And she's like, oh yeah, that's the point. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna poke at your hip. Can I poke at your hip? And she's like, but it's my back that hurt. Yes, I know. That's where you feel it, right? That's not where the release is, right? And she's like, okay, right? And so I follow it down, and we'll come back to how I followed it, right? I follow it down. I find this point on her waist, and I'm like, oh, here. Oh, that really hurts. And I'm like, yeah, it does. Breathe, right? And I'm holding it, and she's breathing, and I'm holding it. And I'm like, oh yeah, all right, that's shifted. All right, move your shoulder now. And she's like, so my shoulder hurt. You poked at my waist, and now you want me to move my shoulder. How could that have made a why is that different? Hi, I'm Mark, and this is what I do, right? And she's like, but it doesn't hurt anymore. And I'm like, yeah, because we shifted it. She's like, but you poked at my waist and shoulder, and you knew from over there that it was the shoulder, and I didn't have a chance to say anything. And I'm like, yeah, hi, this is Mark, and this is what I do. And yeah, and I have countless examples of those over decades, right? But it comes back to people have seen me work, and they'll be like, oh yeah, but you knew that was a common point. No, I didn't, right? And I don't try to memorize like the 17 most common places people have bodily pain, right? Because now I become aware of them, and I'm just like, for you in this moment, that's where I feel it, right? And so it's an awareness, it's a practice. It comes with practice and with doing, but it's a skill that I'm convinced that anyone that has the interest can learn to do better than they used to, right? I'm not saying that everyone will become any particular level of skill, because I think that that's just, you need to have the interest and take the time to do the work. As my welding instructor used to say, you have to do the mileage, right? If you only have spent 3 or 4 inches of doing a weld pattern, right, on metal, then you haven't done the mileage. Like, you need to do several miles of welding before you get good at the weld, right? And so this kind of body work and awareness and energies is a kind of thing that you need to take some time, right? And get some feedback and find out.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 things that are like sticking out for me. So there's what you're doing and how you're doing it. So
yeah,
it seems like there's, let's say, like the external of like, okay, so you're touching someone, and then that's having an effect, and like that's sort of like to split it in a way that you might not, but that's happening in them. And then what's happening in you is you're looking at someone, you're feeling things.
Yeah.
And then you use those feelings, and you process it with your training and intuition and stuff to then find points on their body that correspond to other points in their body.
Right. But come right back to Junji's first class, right? Learn to crawl, learn to shift the body weight, right? And learn to feel which hand feels warmer and which hand feels cold, right? It's greatly simplified, but it was also for a first time, right? It was something I could learn to do in one day.
Yeah, it's like someone
perception and then learn to modulate it.
Yeah, like even someone with no background could learn like this. Like, this is a good entry point into the field.
Absolutely, right? And I mean, that's the, for my journey, I first had the awareness of a practitioner helping me with my computer neck and shoulders, right? And I could feel there was a difference, right? So I knew something had changed. I didn't know anything about the mechanism, but I knew the result. right? And so this is what's informed the actual name that I use now, right? MarkOfChange, right? You're stuck in something and you want to change it, right? The only way you know that it's actually different is that you have some measurement, right? You have some way of knowing. It's back to the pure science approach, right?
Okay.
You can't do many things in science if you can't have a hypothesis and then test that hypothesis and figure out whether it holds up or not. And to do any of that, you need to be able to take some kind of measurement analysis, right? Like when I did my physics work, right? You take a ball bearing and you drop it on a piece of metal and you count the number of inches it bounces each time, right? If you can see the measurement, right, then you can get a much more accurate number, right? But if you just put it up against a piece of paper and you watch the pattern, right, and you let persistence of vision draw the pattern in your mind, you can see it, right? But either way, you need to have some kind of reference as to what that pattern looked like, right? Or what that amount was, right? I
Like,
had
you
the
were tracking
reference. Yeah, I had the reference that I had trouble moving my head. And after the treatment, I could move my head easier. I could move it farther, right? So whether it was easier, whether it was more comfortably, whether it was farther, I knew there was something different.
Yeah, the Mythbusters guy said the difference between science and screwing around is that you're writing it down.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And then it comes around to, is it repeatable?
Right. I think this is such a good approach, because like this is very much how I perceive like the rationalist way to do it, which is like someone's making claims of phenomenology, and so you're setting up predictions. You're saying, okay, like if that's true, then like maybe I don't know what change is going to happen, but I know a change is going to happen.
Right.
And so I'm going to
Right.
mark starting conditions, and then they're going to change, and then I'm going to update. I'm going to be like, okay, like these are the kind of variables that change. And then every time I can get like better experimentation to like provide more evidence into number one, I guess, that there is actually something here and it's not just chance, and what that thing is, and then how to actually interact with it.
Yeah, exactly. And the ways of getting there, like there are lots of change modalities, right? There's lots of different approaches. And there are folks that advocate for or against or sit somewhere in neutrality that they don't know whether it will or whether it won't, because they don't, hopefully, they're sitting in neutrality because they don't have experience, right? Or you have actually on one of the courses that I did early on, I had maybe 40 hours of Shiatsu, right? So very early on in my training, I was at a different course and we were going around the room introducing ourselves. And I said, oh yeah, I'm learning Shiatsu. I'm doing some other stuff, right? I'm here now learning about this thing called therapeutic touch. And one of the people at lunch came to me and she said, oh, hey, you mentioned you know something about Shiatsu. I'm like, yeah, I know a little bit about Shiatsu, right? I'm mostly as a recipient, right? But I'm learning a little bit about doing it. She said, my girlfriend had a Shiatsu treatment and it hurt. And I'm like, oh, how do you know? It's like, well,
Take
when we were at lunch,
responsibility.
well, no, it's better than that, right? Girlfriend is at lunch and says, oh yeah, it really hurt. Well, how did it hurt? Well, like this, and reached across the table and jabbed her, right? And hit a point that was wickedly sore, right? And so the person who's talking to me is like, oh yeah, I felt that. Oh my God, that really hurt. Like I wouldn't do that again, right? And I'm hearing this story and I'm like, so your girlfriend received treatment and she didn't enjoy it and it didn't go well, and that's fine, that happens. But then she, who has received one treatment that she didn't like, reached across the lunch table and poked you, and now you feel like you've had Shiatsu and you don't like it. And I'm like, okay. So at that time in my life, I was very enthusiastic and I'd be like, oh yeah, let me show you something, right? And I could do a thing, right? And I'm like, not showing you anything. I'm not. We're gonna have a
Pearls before
conversation.
swine.
And here's, my recommendation for you is find a therapist with training. Tell them this story. Tell them that you're having concerns and that you're open, but build me up to this, right? And if the therapist doesn't want to hear the story, then walk away, right? And if they're not willing to work with you, walk away. And if it doesn't feel right, walk away, because maybe it's true that Shiatsu, right, finger pressure, isn't a modality that works for you, right? Go and find a modality that does. But please do not write off an entire modality based on your girlfriend had a horrible treatment and then poked you and you had a horrible treatment. Right? Because,
Mark, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you have the best story?
I just have life, right? Like, and I'm a horrible, creative writing kind of person, right? I couldn't make these stories up, right? And even when we did our pre-chat and we talked about these, right?
Also
We worked
had
together
that story.
a couple of weeks ago. And none of the 2/3 of the stories that I've mentioned so far, I hadn't thought about in years, right?
Mhm.
But they're illustrative in this talking about how do you get from not knowledgeable to having some kind of experience to having some kind of knowledge, right? I'm careful there, right? I'm not claiming that I have, anything more than my experience, right? But I can apply my experience to now working with people, right? And seeing that they achieve change, right? That they go from a place that they were less happy, for whatever definition of happy is for them, to a place where they're more happy. Again, whatever definition of happy is for them, right? And they tell me I'm in a better place, or I'm in a different place, or I'm now, I'm not sure exactly what you did, but now I'm in a different place and now I have a new thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm better, but I'm definitely different.
This is how
what,
Mark
like,
does it. Would you like different problems to the ones that you're having? And
well,
they're like, yes,
it's
please. And he's like, okay, here you go. And then they're like, I did ask for this.
yeah. And it's actually one of the biggest problems that body workers in general face, right? And that is, I felt a little off, and then Mark, you worked on me, and now my shoulder, like, oh, it really hurts.
Yeah.
Like, you did that. And I'm like, actually, if I had the ability to do that, I would be in a different profession. I've just brought you into the awareness
That it was
that
already
your
hurting.
shoulder was already in a bad way. And humans are really good at masking, not paying attention, right? And it's in that common doctor's joke, right? Doctor, every time I do this, it hurts. Well, don't do that, right?
I thought you were
it's
gonna do the like, doctor, when I poke here it hurts, and then when I poke here it hurts, and then when I poke here it hurts.
right, and they're all different hurts.
No.
No, and it's like, so what's wrong with me? And the doctor says your finger's broken.
God, okay, yes. All right, I do hear that
The thing that I think happens, like they talk about in massage, is like you'll, like, a person will come in with complaining of a pain and you'll relieve that pain, and then they'll have a bunch of other pains. And when they say what's going on is that the person had all these pains, but there was only, like, the biggest one was like aware. And so once you like fix that one, you're like, oh, actually I have this other problem, and now I have this other problem, and like you can just keep going and knocking down all the problems, but like
describe that
they're not aware of them
as,
until...
we describe that as a little bit like peeling an onion, right? So you get this onion, right? And once you take off the outer layer, you're looking at the skin, the outermost layer of the onion, right? And if you peel off that layer, you have more onion, but it's slightly different, right? It's still onion, it's slightly smaller size because you've taken off a layer, but now the patterns and pieces are a little different, right? And so body work is a lot like that. You tear off or peel off the outer layer of the onion, then you have more onion, but it's slightly different. And there's more things that are now exposed and you're paying attention to them. And so this exact thing, right? Oh, I came in because my shoulder hurt, right? And you did some work on my shoulder and now my neck feels funny, right? And so I'm doing some work on the neck and oh, wait, now my shoulder blades and my spine. And it's like, okay, so we're peeling back layers. And there's actually two sides to this that are really interesting. So one side of it is that humans are really good at not paying attention to all the things going on and only paying attention to the biggest thing or the most important of the moment, right? It may not be the most important, but it might be the important that I'm focused on, right? Like I've wrenched my neck or I've slept funny. I want my neck to feel better, right? And it's actually a problem for practitioners, right? Because you come in and it's like, yeah, your neck hurts, but really it's your whole spine. Like your neck is hurting because your spine, right? But some clients have difficulty accepting that it should be the whole spine. And it's like, no, it's just my neck. The rest of it's fine. I don't feel it. Well, no, you don't feel it because you're having an acute problem with your neck and you're not paying attention to the rest of it. And once you alleviate the acute issue with the neck, all of a sudden, oh, yeah, there is a thing. You caused the thing with my spine. It was fine before. No, I actually didn't cause the thing. I just let you become more aware of it, right? But the flip side of this, and this comes into another whole kind of slippery slope conversation, but it's interesting, is the whole, if a person has a series of symptoms and you're treating the symptoms, or more importantly, you're masking the symptoms so they don't notice each symptom, then if you're not actually able to backtrack, right, dig down and find the actual problem, then if you can't sort what the problem is and shift the actual problem, then yeah, one symptom after another, and you try to address them and they keep coming back, it's an actual sign. The pattern is that you're masking or addressing a series of symptoms and not actually finding the problem, right? So the fix my boyfriend story as we go is exactly this case, right? So we'll fast forward a couple of decades and in my journey, and I've now learned something called energetic magic, right? And so energetic magic is the idea that our world is shaped by our beliefs, right? And that the beliefs we carry literally shape our reality. And if we can find the beliefs and shift them, we can change our reality. So here's part of the problem. It's every belief that we have. The conscious mind talking to you now is a part of my consciousness and has some idea of my conscious beliefs. But the other than conscious parts of me also carry beliefs. But by definition, they're other than my conscious awareness. So my conscious mind isn't aware of them. So there could be beliefs that I'm carrying that are shaping my reality that my conscious mind can't think through because my conscious mind isn't aware of them, right? So we fast forward to, I was in San Francisco at the time. A friend of mine rang me up. I was like, okay, all right, tired of my boyfriend. He is complaining about his shoulder pain. I just can't take it anymore. He's done all the things. It's not going away. You need to come and fix my boyfriend. And I'm like, wait, whoa. I am not in the business of fixing boyfriends. Right? Like,
you can hire a vet if you want him fixed. That's it.
The premise here is like, yeah, not the thing. And yeah, sure. If you want to go down that route, the vernacular in many countries for veterinarian practice and fixing them is that's a totally different service.
Oh,
that's way over there, right? Which I'm pretty sure is where Elliot was going with that one. Yeah, all right, I do hear that correctly. So I'm like, if your boyfriend would like to book some work with me about an issue, then I'd be happy to chat with him. Yes, he wants to do that. Okay. So long story short, I did eventually go and see him, right? And I did eventually okay, so hey, what's going on? What's the problem? He's like, oh, my shoulder. Right. And I'm like, okay, so your shoulder is hurting. All right. So what do you know? Right. And he's like, well, I've been to the doctor and they gave me some pills, and the pills wear off and the pain comes back. I've gone to a massage therapist, and after the massage, the shoulder feels better. But, pardon me, after the massage wears off, right, pain comes back. Same when I see a physiotherapist. They work on the shoulder, right? Better for a while, and the pain comes back. And I'm like, okay. So checking, right? First couple of things, right? Have you had an injury? Have you had some surgery? Have you got any history? Has something happened, last year, last decade, many decades ago? Like, what's going on with the shoulder? It's like, nope, don't remember anything, don't have any scars, don't have any history, nothing comes to my conscious awareness. He didn't use the term conscious awareness, I did, right? He's just like, no, nothing's ever happened, right? And I'm like, okay. And so energetic magic is very magic in the sense that the first skill that we learn, literally first day of the course, is that person said the shoulder. So I put my hands on his shoulder, and then I am really quiet, and I just pay attention, and I notice. And in that moment, I became aware, okay, and it was really specific, right? And this is the first time I've worked with someone outside of a classroom situation with energetic magic, right? So in a classroom, all the people in the classroom have decided to
already believe,
yep, they've paid some money, they've taken off the time, they've traveled to be there, they are already on board, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, as the phrase goes, right? This guy, his girlfriend knows my background, right, and has some experience of body work with me, but he doesn't know me from Adam, right? And I don't know him, I don't know anything about him, right? And so I have my hands on his shoulders, and I'm like, there it is. Okay, you were 7 years old, you had this interaction with parent, and I named the gender of the parent, and it went like this. And he's kind of looking at me like, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So here's the clearing, right? Are you willing to step out of the belief that you have to carry the pain of that event with you? And he was like, yeah, I can let go of that. Like, all right, there, I felt it. I felt a shift, right? And I'm like, all right, I felt that shift. It shifted. Move your shoulder. And he's like, but what did you do? I didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You stepped out of the story that you needed to have that pain. And he's like, but I just, and I'm like, move your shoulder. He's like, well, it was hurting before. And I know it was hurting before. Move it now. And he's like, but you just, my shoulder doesn't hurt. Yeah. And for that issue, that shoulder pain will never come back, because for him and how his body was at that moment, that shoulder pain was telling him to look at this story from 40 plus years ago and let go of the pain aspect of it, not the whole story, not the fact that it happened, but that he had to acknowledge that it was painful at that time, and he was bringing up that pain at some level, but not at a conscious level, right? If he'd known at a conscious level, oh, my shoulder is hurting, it's because when I was 7, I had this interaction with my parent, and I should clear that, right? If he'd had that awareness, he wouldn't have needed to see the doctor, to see the massage therapist, to take other steps, right? And complain to his girlfriend about his shoulder pain, to the point that she engaged me to come and help, right? And so it's that awareness, right, that sometimes, often, takes an external person to come in to notice, right? How many times have you, in your, as you think about, day to day, week to week, year to year, where it takes someone from outside to say, hey, Mark, every time you sit in that chair, like you sit in that chair and then you come out of that chair and you're always like stretching, like, oh yeah, and you're complaining. It's like, maybe that's not a good chair. Right? It's like, oh yeah, if I'd only paid attention to why that chair was uncomfortable, I might have been able to figure that out. But I didn't. It took someone else to have that perspective. Right? And so for this case where the person had the issue with their shoulder, right? It took me to just be, right? Put my hands where they're feeling the discomfort and just be really open and really quiet. And I'm not saying those are easy. I can talk about that training day. It's day one of that training course was a whole thing for me. But in the actual work of it, I'm being quiet and I'm open to being guided to what's going on. And then all of a sudden I have this story, right? And I confirm, you were this age, you had this interaction with this parent, it went like this. I didn't make that up, right? I didn't get that from the history of, oh, hey, do you have any history with that shoulder, right? It's like, oh yeah, when I was 7 and my parent yelled at me, that's why my shoulder's hurting. Like,
Right.
well, if you knew that, we would be able to work with that, but they
Right,
didn't
I got
have
a
a clue.
question, Daniel. Have
Right.
you worked out how to do it yet? Or do you need more?
No, I was about to ask him how to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So, that it's a really fun
Or
story in that in the energetic magic, which is literally, you can go to the YouTube channel, energetic magic, with a C, not MAGICK, it's MAGIC. And you can find 500 plus recordings of clearings that Shiraz has done. If you scroll all the way back to the beginning, you can see a recording of a very energetically drunk Mark coming out of my first training weekend where I'm on video and they're like, so Mark, what do you think of this training? And I'm like, oh my God. And like my
Oh my God,
eyes
I
are
see it.
dilated. And I'm like, oh my God, I am just, oh, this was such a good class and people, and like I'm not blinking, right? And I, at that point, had decades of training in energetics. And the thing about the course is that it's a 2-day class, right? And the first day of learning how to do energetic magic, we were told, okay, class 1 runs till 5 o'clock. We have a break, and at 6 o'clock, we have a skill share. So you have to have a skill to come to Skillshare, right? Because we're going to do an exchange, and you got to have a skill to exchange, right? And so I knew that everyone who'd come to the day 1 of the class had the invitation to come to Skillshare. So I'm like, okay, day 1, you're going to learn a skill. Like, we're going to have a skill by the 5 o'clock, right? And so I'm watching how the day progresses, and we're going through a bunch of stuff, and it's not really doing training. We're not learning. We're not doing any hands-on stuff. We're just doing all this other clearing work. And the clearing work started with an incorrectly attributed phrase, but it's wise nonetheless. If I had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend 40 minutes sharpening my axe. Right? And if you want to Google who the hell
Abraham
actually said
Lincoln.
this, who's it attributed to, you'll find that there's some dispute as to who it's attributed to. And frankly, I don't care who it's attributed to. I care that it worked. It described what happened, right? Because as we went through day number 1, we literally went through 10 levels of teachability and clearing issues that we had as students of being teachable, right? And so we clear out blocks, we clear out various bits. We turn on, and literally we learn to turn on our bullshit filter and keep it on. And the instructor is like, and keep it on with me. If I say something and it sounds like bullshit, call me on it, right? If you hear something in the world and it seems like bullshit, then check it out, right? Is it bullshit or is it real? Like, what's going on there, right? And so we're going through this stuff. We have a break for lunch. We come back from lunch, right? We're going through more stuff, and I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, it's 3:30, 3:45, it's 4 o'clock, class ends at 5. We haven't started doing anything. Like, I have other skills, right? I have Shiatsu training, I have Reiki training, I have skills to share, right? But there's other people here. I don't know what skills they have to share, right? And so we get to 4 o'clock, right? And we're down to the last hour of the first day. And we haven't learned, we haven't done a hands-on, we haven't started changing anything, right? And then the instructor's like, okay, so it's time, pick a partner, right? Have the partner feel in their body something that's off. So back to the person with the shoulder. If they don't have a thing that they're like, oh, I'm distressed about my relationship, then simply say to them, and if that distress of your relationship manifested in your body somewhere, where would that be? Like, oh yeah, and they give you a location. It's like, all right, so be quiet, put your hands on the space, right? Front and back, side to side, wherever it's comfy. And then notice what comes up. And just be quiet. All right. And in that moment, right, with sufficient hours of preparation, literally something will come up. Right. And then we can ask them, oh, hey, this came up for me. Right. And we can actually ask them a statement that is true or false. Does this feel right? Right? Or does this resonate? Or is this true for you? Right? And have them say, oh yeah, that's true, or no, I don't think so. Right? And then we read the energy of how they answer the question. Right? So when I was working with said fix my boyfriend case, right? And I'm like, so when you were 7, feels like there was an interaction with your parent, and I named the gender of the parent. And they're like, yeah. Like, and the argument was about this topic. And they're like, yeah. Right. And so both in their manner and in their energy, both of those answers felt true. Right. So now I have a specific time and a specific incident. Right. And I'm like, what is it about that? Oh, what about that is there's a pain of the energy of that. Right. And so it's like, are you willing to step out of the story that you need to carry that pain? Right. And so we call it when it's a belief, right? Like they have a belief that there's a moment, a pain, an interaction, right? That formed the belief. But when that belief keeps coming up, we call that repeated belief a story. Right. And it's kind of like a groove on a scratched record, right? It'll play up to a point and then it'll jump back, and it'll play up to a point and then it'll jump back. Right. And so stories are like that. They keep repeating. And when they become unconscious, and this is the problematic part, when stories are repeating and they're unconscious, they're stuck in that groove and they're keep repeating, but they're in our other than conscious mind. And so our conscious mind doesn't know they're there. So that story is replaying. The pain is coming up in the shoulder. I feel the pain, but I'm not attached to what's triggering why that pain is coming up, right? And that's where the awareness of an outside practitioner, if that works, deep meditation, if that works, going to anything to like taking a yoga class that teaches you beyond the asanas of the positions.
I feel like if all that doesn't work, just ask your wife.
Sure.
She'll tell you.
Ask someone that has an awareness from outside, right? And see like what they will tell us, right? And so the whole thing about the finishing this day of training, right? We started at 4 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, everyone had done both receiving and change work on someone else. And they all had put their hands on, be quiet, notice what it is, and then ask the person if they're willing to shift what comes up. We all had a skill. Right, day 2, we hone the skills, we build more, right? But by the end of day 1, basic skill. And we did that all. And what really blew me away as someone that has studied teaching and has failed teaching others and learned how to be a better teacher by watching teaching others and watching them fail to teach, right? I did that the summer I was 16 with 15, 17. Summer I was 17 with the Army Cadets. I'd taken 2 other years of training on Canadian Forces bases. And then the third summer I was teaching how to teach. And I learned a ton more about teaching how to teach when I was actually seeing people fail. Right. And so this day of seeing this whole teachability thing happen, where it's like, we got to 4 o'clock and we haven't actually taught anything. But what we've done is we've cleared all the blocks to being ready. So when our teacher went to teach in that last hour, we could learn.
It clicked. I'm excited because it clicked why you're telling me this story of all stories. Okay. Oh, I mean,
Yeah,
like,
neat, eh?
yeah. No, I'm getting it.
Yeah. And if you want a referral link, I'll give you a referral link to anyone that wants to get training in this.
Sure.
Because there are regular classes and it is something that people can learn to do. And one of the interesting things about it that came out of pandemic is that you don't have to be in the same place to do it. You can do it over distance, right? And actually, for those in the audience who are interested in the how much of this is real and how much of this can happen in ways, there's something that we learned to do in the end of day 2, which we learned to do in person, which is called an infusion, right? So everything about energetic magic up to this point is about clearing, right? And removing and taking away and getting rid of. But the last part of what we learned is called an infusion, and that's bringing into our life what we want, right? And it has a very physical component when you do it in person, because you have the person literally stand up, right? And when we're doing this in person, we have to put down pillows and we have to have people spotting, right? Because you stand and then you say what you would like. And if it just works, then it's going to work. But most often it's not going to work because what we want is blocked in some way. So we're doing some clearings and we're doing some clearings and we're getting it to go. And then when it finally goes, you know that it goes because your knees buckle and you fall over. Right. And that's why we have pillows and cushions and spotters, to make sure that no one hurts themselves as they fall from standing into not standing. Right. So the first class I was in, we're all learning how to do this. And then there was one person attending remotely. Right. And so, they're in Vancouver and we're here in Toronto, Canada. Right. So that's, 4 or 5 hours by plane if you get a decent wind. Right. Or lack of wind on the way there and decent wind on the way back. But that's jet stream. And so there's this person in Vancouver and our instructor's like, oh, I've never done this at distance before. Let's see. Right. And so he does it at distance and she has a great big beanbag chair and she falls over. And she's like, oh, that's really cool. And the instructor's like, oh, hey, this worked at distance. And I'm like, okay, gotta check this out. Hey, can I work with you? And I'm like, yeah, you can work with me. All right, when you're ready, stand up and let's do this again, right? And so I'm like, what would you like? And I'm like, all right, poof, right? And she falls over. I'm in Toronto and she's in Vancouver, right? 3 time zones away, and she falls over. I'm like, oh, cool. I didn't know you could do that over Zoom. All right. Now all of a sudden, oh yeah. And so it turns out that lots of these things can be done at distance, right? And you don't necessarily have to be in the same space. It's one of the things with Shiatsu, right? Like finger pressure, harder to do over Zoom. It's like, oh, okay. Are you feeling it now? Are you feeling it now? Right? I'm being a little mischievous there because you can actually do some of it over Zoom. It's not done that way over Zoom, but it can be done at distance. But yeah, these arts, and like I say, my experience has largely been based on what I feel and what people tell me they feel. Right? My neck didn't move, my neck moves. Right? Shoulder hurt to lift, it doesn't hurt to lift anymore. Right? So there's very tangible results. Right? And I don't care if they're tangible to external parties. I care if they're tangible to the person receiving. Mm-hmm. Right? If they can tell me that they have a range of motion change, they feel different, their body now works in a different way, or they've come into an awareness that's different, then I know that something has changed.
Okay, I'm
Right?
gonna
It
have
may
to
not have
ask,
been,
I'm
yeah.
gonna ask
it's-
Daniel. Do you get how to do it yet? No. Okay. Keep going, Mark.
Right. So yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
There's okay, so I'm sensing an energy with you too. um,
No, we'd never do that.
Nah.
um,
How are you feeling, Daniel?
it's a different part. So like a lot of what I've been doing is like there's like a different part of my awareness that's like kind of showing up now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here, from my pagan roots, right? Take your hands, bring them together.
Are we gonna do the rubbing and then the feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. Except this is this version of it, right? So as you're moving your hands, and everyone doing the recording should definitely do this, right? Slow down. Bring your awareness to between where your hands are touching. Let your hands move even slower. Let your hands be very lightly touching. Let your awareness build. And as the awareness builds, let that awareness push your hands apart. And so your focus is on the space between your hands, whatever that is for you. Might be a vibration, might be a temperature, might be a color, might be something you don't have a word for, and yet you sense it. You may notice the digits shift. You may notice that as you're doing this, your mind has ideas that come up or ideas that disappear. There's no one right answer. There's only the awareness of where you are in this moment. So now take time to notice what you notice about this space. And when you're ready, let that collapse. And as that collapses, notice, do your hands come together? Right? Do you have a sense between your hands of there being a thing? And let that collapse. And when you're ready, come on back. And so, Daniel, to the extent that you're comfortable, I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about what you noticed, if any.
It's hard to describe, but there's like it's like the thing that's the words that are coming to mind is like an interstitial expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
Yeah.
feels like I guess like there's all this pressure like collapsing me, and like this is like expanding it, and like I'm imagining like all the blood vessels just like sucking up all the like opening up and like
Opening up. Yeah. Right.
being absorbed.
And the blood vessels opening is a common reason why people describe temperature change. Right? You, in some days and lights, and if the light is right, you can see the color of your hands change. Right? When I've done this over at the Science Center where they had a thermal camera, right? So they've got an infrared camera that's projecting an interpretation of thermal temperatures in visible color range, right? And I've done this, you can see my hands change color. Right? My hands aren't moving. Right? They're still there. They're still in front of me. But the thermal camera shows the temperature is changing. right? And in visible light, we don't generally see temperature change like that. We can see color change subtly, right? This light, and over Zoom, we might not be able to see it so well, right? In person, it's easier to see. But in the dramatic cases, you can see color change. And in the more dramatic cases, oh, I don't have a water bottle up here. Qigong practitioners, right? One of the stage tricks is to take a plastic water bottle, right? Take the top off it, project energy into it, and bring it to tea temperature. Right? And so they'll take it from room temperature to the temperature to make tea, or strong enough to make steam, right? And just heat that bottle of water up. Right? It's dramatic, right? It's a good stage presentation, and I don't quite use it for therapy, because I don't generally need to steam people, right? But it works as a demonstrator of what's possible.
Mhm.
Right? So back to the hands for a minute. You game for round 2, Daniel?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna energetic magic. We learn a skill, right? One of those skills is that wasn't, you said sure, but that wasn't entirely true for you. I need to check. Do I need to tell you more about what's coming, and what's the doubt?
There's no doubt. There's just like I guess like I'm still processing like
Processing. Sure.
yeah.
Don't worry.
Like,
This next one will add to the processing.
Okay. It's like it uses muscles, and I'm like not aware of what like the
Sure.
muscles,
Absolutely.
the way, like there's like a whole
Absolutely.
vibe going on that I'm not
Right.
fully-
And one of the things that you actually touched on that's worth highlighting here, right? When I asked you what that was like, and your answer was, I don't have words for it, right? And that's one of the problems. Our vocabulary in Western English doesn't have a lot of words around this, right? If you have awareness of Indigenous people in Northern Canada, right? In Southern Canada, we talk about, there's snow, white stuff, right? Like, pretty standard, right? When you're sufficiently far north and your life depends on describing the right kind of snow, there are 7 base words that they start from, and then they add detail to those words to describe the snow. Right? So those of us in southern parts of Canada, we're like, oh yeah, there's snow or there isn't snow, right? Our lives don't anymore depend on reading the snow, right? For people that depend, where their livelihood depends on surviving in snow, they start with 7 base words that talk about different kinds of snow, and then they add modifiers to that, right? They have a language base because it really matters to them. Energetics is similar. If you've not worked with it, if you've not had to try to discover what was it when my hands were here and my awareness was between my hands, and what was that? If you haven't done that exercise, if you haven't worked with it a little bit, you had no need to develop the vocabulary. Does that make sense?
For sure. For sure. I've gone through this like not knowing and then learning and then having to learn words and new ways of thinking many times. I just it doesn't seem like I've done it for this particular one.
Yeah,
like we had this with the jhanas, where I'm like, where when we did the jhanas, and I'm like, oh, okay, like now I have a whole vocabulary to describe like this whole other part of my experience. And also like emotions. I feel like I was very not good with my emotions before, and now I'm like able to like name them.
What my hypnosis instructor calls dead from the neck down.
I have a word for that. That's heads on sticks.
Yeah, that would do it. And not in the Game of Thrones sense of, the decapitated head on the stick.
No,
but it's very similar to that one.
Yeah,
in the sense that, like my body, no, it just does what I tell it to, and it doesn't tell me anything. Doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I went through that with the body stuff, right? Like learning anatomy and muscles and stuff, and like
yeah. I mean, and finding out that these terms that we have, that we've lost what they mean in some sense, right? This idea of a gut feel, right? It's like, oh, my something about this feels wrong, but I can't describe it. Well, and actually back to your, example of, tell me more about what's going on there. Do you know there's more neurons in our gut than
Yeah.
there is in our cranium?
Yeah.
Right? There's awarenesses, and one of the big challenges with gut awareness is that we don't have a language center directly attached to our gut outside of the hunger one. The hunger one, most of us know. Our stomach growls and it's like, all right, I'll feed you. All right. So that one has a verbal aspect.
We have
But
butterflies.
yeah,
Like there's
but
butterflies in
the
your stomach before you meet a pretty girl.
butterflies, nervousness, walk into a space
The knot.
and something feels wrong. Can't put your finger on it. You can't vocalize it, but need to not be here.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah, it's
those
interesting 'cause, like,
awarenesses.
yeah, intuition. Sometimes I do. I'm like, oh, my stomach is like telling me stuff, and I'll like interact with it. And
Yeah,
it's not just.
absolutely.
It's like
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
like there's literally
yeah,
like something happening that
yeah.
I'm like
And
conversing with.
one of my passions right now is delving more into idiodynamic responses of the body and learning how we can interact in a hypnotic way without trance and have direct conversations and find out that, I had a case of this last week. I needed to be in Maryland and I needed to be there in a way that I could camp for a week and not be sick, but I was coughing and having a sinus issue that has historically been a real problem for me. And so on the drive down, I made changes to me in hypnosis, but without trance, because I'm driving. I kind of need to, keep my attention on the
Yeah.
road, right?
Be
But I was
careful.
using idiodynamic, one the most common of which is idiomotor, right? So you have twitches of the fingers, right? The digits moving is a very common, to the point that sometimes these are just called idiomotor responses, but I like calling them idiodynamic because not everybody has motor movement, right? Some people it's a color, some people it's a sound, some people it's a sense, a scent, either nose thing, or it's a sense, an internal, I have an awareness, right? All of those can be idiodynamic responses, and you can use them to do personal change work,
Mhm.
right? And so that's
In the
something that
cough, I was like, oh, I know this guy Mark I can send you to.
yeah, exactly. All right, before we wander too far off, Daniel, do you feel like you're game for round 2 of the hands?
Sure. Yeah, if that's
Yeah,
what
right.
awareness to do.
So for this one, I'm just gonna set the heads up here, right? So Daniel, the heads up here is for you to notice something, and that's all, right? We can't predict what, if anything, you're gonna notice, so I won't charge it in any way because there's no guarantee, right? Right. So what I want you to do, bring your hands back, right? Same idea, same exercise, let them come slow. I'm doing it a little faster only because I've had more practice, right? But let your awareness come to the space between your palms, right? And just because we can, we're going to do this for Elliot too at the same time. So Elliot, let yourself, focus on the space between the hands, right? Whatever that is, let yourself be there. And now for both of you, I'm going to take my hands and my field. I'm going to bring my hands over top of your hand. And notice, as I interact with each of you, what you notice in this moment. Like that. That's it.
There's like a sense of relief in my back,
Relief
like spine,
in your back and spine.
or like the spinal muscles, I should say.
Spinal muscles, sure. And now I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to let that collapse. We are disconnected. And now for each of you, let yourself come back. And so Daniel, not to put you on a spot, but on the spot, how was that?
It was good. My eyes feel different.
You feel different.
I had it last time. I think also like my vision got all weird after. Like my glasses
Mhm.
became too strong.
Yep. Yep. One of my instructors has talked about not needing his glasses anymore because the energy work that he did changed his need for glasses. And it's so interesting that you had that response, and yet we've never talked about that.
Yeah. There's a relief in
Right?
my back as well.
Yeah. Is there more there?
Hmm?
Is there more to release there?
Like I guess like the part, like the rest of the stuff with relief, like there's so like after, like there was like a release. It felt like, I guess, like after you stop tensing a muscle, so I didn't notice the muscle.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so then like there's like that flush of blood that comes in.
Yeah.
And
Because
now
we
there's like a
humans are
back pain.
really good at not noticing where we're holding tension, where we're crooked out. I'm like, how's your day going? Oh, I'm fine. Like,
Yeah.
you look in the mirror, do you notice your shoulders are different heights? Like, no, it's pretty normal for me. It's like, you know that humans are in general bilateral. Like, generally, our left and right sides are generally the same. But go to a really good chiropractor, for example, and they will start, one of the first things they'll start with before they do any work on you is they'll do a full body x-ray, right? And then they'll put the x-ray up on the wall, and then they'll literally project a chart, grid lines, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, look at how much the shoulders, the hips, all these other joints are not lining up, right? And they'll actually measure it. And they're like, oh yeah, so look, that hip is out like that shoulder's out like that, the vertebrae, right, don't line up, right? And they'll look at it from a very, like, I've got out my measuring tape and I am checking how much and we got my protractor. Oh, look, the angles are off, right? And they'll see that, right? And there's a great story of a podiatrist, foot doctor, that in his practice, he needed to see how people walked, right? So he arranged probably one of the most bizarre doctor's offices because his waiting room was way down that end of the building. And when you were called for your appointment, you came into the hallway and you walked this long hallway to his desk. And he was sitting at his desk and he watched how you walked. And before you ever had a chance to describe to him what was going on, he was watching how you walked, right? And that told him a lot about what was going on for you before the client ever had a chance to speak, right? And so because I don't want to lose the moment, Elliot, did you notice anything?
I'm curious, actually, Mark, like, what are you picking up from me? Because I feel like there's like, I'm carrying stuff, or there's like something happening here that
Sure. Right?
Like I don't have.
So in that moment, I was purely projecting the notice something, right? But I'm careful not to contaminate that, for lack of a better word, of what to notice.
Right.
Because here's one of the problems with subtle arts, right? One of the problems with trying to do, well, no, it's not even that, right? Like that's another whole side of it. That's a different kind of projection. What I'm talking about here is that subtle arts are challenging to work with sometimes, because if I'm working with someone and I put my hands over their hands and I feel a vibration, but they describe it as a heat, right? We're using two different words, right? But we're having a physical interaction. So it's probably related because it's a physical interaction, right? Or an energetic interaction. But I use one word and they use a different word, right? I feel hot, they feel cold. I feel vibration, they feel a queasiness in their stomach, right? These things don't always align, even when they're based on the same interaction, right? And so one of the things I'm really careful about when I guide someone to discover this is not to be like, oh, I put my hands there and you'll feel a vibration. Because now I've said it's a vibration.
Right.
Maybe it's not a vibration for them, right? And if it's
Also,
not
you
a
don't want to
vibration
like
for them, they can be
find
like, oh, good, I didn't feel the vibrations, so I'm terrible at this, and I've just created a trauma, right? And I now have a trauma patient
Or they
on
can say
another.
yes when they really meant no, and then they've also
And
created a misalignment.
it's the other side of it, right? I need to feel a vibration. I'm focusing on a vibration. I got all these other
yeah.
things I'm noticing, but Mark said vibration. So now I got to pay attention to only vibration. Maybe they don't have awareness of vibration, right? And so back up and replace vibration with temperature, with color, with sense. I need to see it. I need to taste it. I need to hear it. I need to have this felt sense that just is hard to tell unless you've had the proper Jedi indoctrination and you've sat with Yoda for a significant amount of time, right? Like, I jest a little bit, but the gist of it is that in the experiences that I've had, the best ones come when people don't tell me what to feel, but they let me discover and are open to me describing it in whatever horrible, terrible, like
Personal
newbie
language.
doesn't make sense way, right? Like, because I'm describing what I'm aware of, and when it's subtle, right? So here's the thing about subtle arts, right? They're subtle, right? If it was 2x4 up to the side of the head, like I'd know whether I got hit or not in general, if the person wielding the 2x4 has any sense of how to fling a 2x4, like I know, like, it's not subtle, right? It's pretty obvious, right? I start having a welt, I'm laying on the ground, like, I'm bleeding out of my ear, like there's something that's not subtle, right? But with energetics, right, working in these arts, the words, the ways, the how they come out, and what people will notice about them. I've had a Qigong instructor who I was talking to him one day about the nuts and bolts of working with people. And I said, so you're able to notice from across the room. And can you tell me about that? Right. And he's like, yeah, it's weird. When I work with people, I see like a black and white field sense come up, and I can see like cobwebs where they're stuck. And I'm like, oh, that's wild. Because for me, I have a sense in my body like, ooh, they're stuck there, right? But for me, it's like a movement that's not lubricated, right? It's like, it's just it's stuck there, right? And I've had another person in one of my classes. We were doing Qigong medical projection. We fill ourselves with energy. We overflow that energy into the person, and we build up where they're deficient. Right. And there was a day I was working with someone, and one of my classmates looked over and, oh, yeah, they're fill up, they're flowing over. And I'm like, but I only just started. Yeah, they don't need that much. They're done. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? Said, I can see it. Right. I could see you fill up. I could see me fill over into them, and they could see it fill out of them or fall and overflow out of them. And I'm like, no, I don't get that channel. Right. And so there for many years was I don't get the visual channel. Like, why don't I get the visual channel? Like, I need the visual channel. Turns out I don't. Right. And because I've let go of needing it, I'm almost out of the belief that I need it. Sometimes I notice things visually where I never used to. Right. Because I've let go of the need to see it. Right. Because the need to see it was blocking my ability to see it. Right. And so that's one of the challenges of working with subtle arts, right? And I have my experience and the way I describe what I work with, that I'm willing to bet 8 billion people on the planet, no one has my same set of lived experiences. Right. And so the way I come at it is what I have learned, experienced, tripped over, fallen over, failed at, gotten back up, brushed myself off, adjusted my course, right? And the flip side is there are the practices for which I got really great responses and they worked really well. There's practices I've talked about where I was learning them that I learned them and I kind of went, oh yeah, right, that's the thing. And I never didn't catch on, right? I didn't do more of it, right? And it's not to say that they aren't a great modality. And they're not to say that they're not a great modality for a practitioner that spends a lot of time and hones that. It didn't draw me to do that time and to do that work, right? And I've had folks say to me, well, hey, well, all Shiatsu is the same, right? And like holding, breathing, pressure, like you learn all the things, right? You go to the same school. And I'm like, technically, but also every modality I've ever studied, right? Whether it was Shiatsu, whether it was Qigong, whether it was Reiki, there are people in the class where we're doing the same body work and the same energy work and the same modality from the same instructor, and we're doing the same exercise. There's people in the class that I'm really drawn to work with, and I really resonate with them. And there's people in the class that I'm ambivalent about. I could work with them, but I'm also not hugely drawn to work with them. And then there's people in the class that we repel each other. I don't know what you're doing over there, but I don't want you to work with me. And they're the same. Mark, I don't know what you're doing over there, but I don't want you to work with me, right? We're in the same class. We're learning the same things. We're doing the same modality, right? We're same hand positions, right? Same exercise, but we're getting different responses. And what that tells me is the practitioner matters, right? What Mark brings to it draws some people, is ambivalent towards some people, and repels people, right? So my interpretation, my way of working, and it could be as simple as he's a Canadian, he's got a beard, presents very male, has this weird 6-foot+ height, right? Whatever it is that doesn't work for them. And so one of the things that I'm careful when I go to work with someone that's new, right? Am I the right person to work with you? Right? Because if it doesn't feel like I'm the right person, maybe I'll send you to one of the classmates who I don't resonate with. Right? Because maybe it's not the modality, maybe it's the Mark part of it. Right? And so, and it's the exact same thing when I did a medical emergency response training, right? One of the things to read, right? You're coming in and somebody's bleeding out, right? You're pulling off a bandage, you're wrapping them up, right? You're stopping the major blood flow, right? And now we're a little calmer, right? The initial trauma is managed to a point, right? But they're still shaking, right? There's still something going on. Sure, they're going into shock. You throw a blanket over them, you get them up off the ground, right? You do all the things. But at some point, there's also are you okay if I continue being the person? Because maybe they need someone that's different, right? And I've actually been, okay, trigger warning. I'm going to mention a thing. The person was fine in the end, but it was rough. It was in the kitchen. It was in California, right? 5 uniformed people are going to a medical emergency response. I'm sitting in the cafeteria. Weirdly, I don't have my response radio that day, so I don't know there's somebody in the kitchen that's hurt themselves, right? The people are walking past me, and one person taps me on the shoulder and is like, you need to come with us. I'm like, how bad is the incident? Like, there's 5 of you. Like, what the hell? And they're like, no, we need your skills, right? And so I'm like, okay. Long story short, the person had an accident with a paring knife, right? They're taking one of these things called an avocado, right? And they managed to put the knife through their hand rather than through the avocado, and it was rough, right? But by the time we got there, for better or for worse, the bleeding was managed, right? The person was sitting, all the initial trauma stuff has been managed. But now what the actual issue is they're not a full employee, and they're in the United States, and they're in a state where they don't have the same kind of medical coverage that other people in the building do. So there's this whole conversation about who and how they're going to receive medical coverage, right? And how it's going to be in the less expensive way, because there's no cheap way. There's just less expensive in the US. My perspective of my experience in the US, I hope other people have different. So it turns out that one of the reasons that I was brought along is because I could sit and listen and talk to them and just bring them into a better space while all of that is going on over there. Because the manager and the employees are figuring out a best plan with the medical responders, and I'm just being with them here. And after, when we were ready and they had a transport plan and they knew a treatment plan, right? And the person's like, oh my God, it's been great just sitting here. And it wasn't that I could tie a triangular bandage faster. And it wasn't that I knew how to assess some other thing. It's just that my skill for being able to just be and be with them. And then here's the esoteric part of it. I can shift my state. And because I can shift my state and you're near me, you're interacting with me, your state can shift. Right? And it's one of those, actually in hypnosis, we use that sometimes to guide someone into a state that we couldn't necessarily do with just words. Right? Because what is it? The accepted number, I think, is somewhere in the 70% of communication is nonverbal. Right? It may depend on which school you go with there, but there's certainly different schools, and they all agree on some amount of nonverbal communication. Right? And whether that's you see someone sigh, you see a thing, or you hear a thing, their breathing changes, their amount that they're fidgeting changes, right? All these things that, even so far as the rate they're blinking changes, right? The way they're blinking changes, how they hold their eyes, their head, their subtle signs, right? And in this day and age of technology, we're going to be like, really? No, that can't be. Oh, let me run this back and turn off the audio and just take out a scratch paper, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, wait, that whatever I'm measuring just changed. Why is that different, right? And I'm sure, I know somebody had talked about it before, but I'm sure that they've built the AI systems that can now real-time live analyze, right? And this is often done for political speeches, right? And looking at eye movement, blink rates, breathing rate changes, all these subtle signs, right? And they're all things that can bring us awareness when we're, quote unquote, quiet enough to notice that they're there. So I feel like I've kind of run off into the weeds. How y'all doing?
Yeah, I listening to you talk. I think I got it. It's
What did you get?
it's like so I'm gonna say words. I don't mean exactly these words, but they're the closest ones that I have. There's like an idiosyncratic relationship to the collective unconscious. So like you're talking and like all like a lot of this stuff, it's like like I have this like urge to like pop in and say, like I have this urge to like you're talking in a way that I would never talk.
Because you're not me.
Huh?
Because you're not me.
Because
Sorry.
yeah, and there's like
I was jumping back to, I have my lived experience and you have yours. Right?
Yeah, and there's like a real like I think there's like a deep acceptance that I haven't like really done yet of, because like a lot of stuff we've been doing is very like universal, right? So like everybody has emotions, everybody has jhanas, everybody has whatever, like muscles, like I'm often sticking to the things that everybody has that we all have in common. And then there's this like just like way of being that you are that is not the way I am. And like I guess it's like appreciating that, or like, and like getting pulled into your world and your point of view, and not having to there's like a lot of stuff you're saying where I'm like, well, is it true? Is it like this? Is it like that? Like I'm wanting to like kind of like
Yeah,
detect it
yeah. And
out.
keep your bullshit filter on, right?
Right. Keep my
I
bullshit
say a
filter on.
thing and it doesn't resonate, right? Or I phrase it in a way like,
Or it
oh
resonates,
wow,
but
you were
I
really
don't trust the
fractionated
resonance.
there, right?
What
It's like, oh, you were really fractionated there. Like, fractionated? What the hell is fraction? What? No, we're not doing maths. What is going on? It's like, oh yeah, right. I used a piece of jargon, right?
no, no,
And
no,
so
but
those things
not even
matter.
it's deeper than the jargon. Like, so that like there's jargon and stuff, which but then there's like your lived experience, like your like the way you're expressing the stories in your life, like it does resonate in like an emotion, in like a feeling way. Like there's certain resonance there, but then there's also like an apprehension of like, are you right? And like I'm starting to realize like it doesn't really matter, because like it's like I'm sure like
Yeah.
some of the story you're saying, you're like, you know, like you're saying it as a story and not as like and you're not, we haven't like sworn you in or anything, so there's not like you're not on that level, you're on like the sharing level. And so there's like that whole dimension of it, like energy transfer, that I've been kind of like always blocking, like always filtering hard,
Yeah.
and like afraid to let
So the
that
question is, what
let that up.
would you want that to be different?
So something has to be different, because it's not like the way I'm now, it's not going to work,
Mhm.
for sure. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to go to one extreme like the other extreme.
Sure.
um
Yeah. You know, as extreme and radical as I may be, I'm certainly not an extreme, right? I'm an example, right? Because you will get people that, you know, some might call really, really enthusiastic. Some might have more stronger words, right? And I tend to anchor myself as much as I can in, did you achieve the change in position, mindset, bodily function that you were looking for, right? Rather than, oh yeah, I study Shiatsu and Shiatsu is the one cure for everything.
right,
No, no, it's a
right, you're
cure. It's a thing. It's the same as, you know, I often use the metaphor of the handyman, right? Where the person has a tool belt and have a bunch of tools in the tool belt, right? And they come up to a problem and they look at the problem and it's like, oh, this problem, it's a pliers problem. I need a pair of pliers, right? And I'm going to get in there with a pair of pliers. But the next problem, it's more of a screwdriver problem, right? And it's like, I can get in there. And maybe the screwdriver is totally the wrong tool, but it's still the only two tools we have in our tool belts, right? So we're trying to do it with the screwdriver, right? And sometimes that works and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you're using the pliers as a pair of hammer, sorry, using the pliers as a hammer on the screwdriver, right? And neither of them are the correct tool, but you're like, it's the only tools I've got, right? So whack, right? And it's like, oh, I got to find the duct tape because I put a hole in it rather than actually fix it, right? And so lots of tools, right? And so my approach is that as I learn a little more about each modality, right, a little more about each tool, then I can take a step back and just look at what presents and be like, oh yeah, this is a situation where this is going to be the right tool, right? And it's why most often in sessions, I don't talk to someone about what tool we're going to use, maybe ever, or certainly until I have some idea what the problem, issue, circumstance is for them, right? And we had this when we did our pre-session, right? Because I did a little bit of work with each of you, use totally different tools, totally different approaches, right? And that's because for me, I am interested in where the person is and where they'd like to be or not be, right? They want to move towards a thing, they want to move away from a thing, right? And then I kind of look at it and I'm like, first off, am I the right person? Right? Because stories, right? I was doing an introduction to hypnosis, right? It was introduction. It was like, what would you like to get out of this? So I went around the room. Hi, What brought you here? What you'd like to get? Hi, what brought you here? What you'd like to get out of this, right? What are your expectations, right? And one person, and I kid you not, she's like, yeah, so I came out, the wedding's in 7 weeks. I have the dress that I want to wear to the wedding. I don't fit in the dress. And I'm like, yeah, I am not the right person. I have a
You need a
fabulous
tailor.
friend who's a seamstress, right? That's what she does. Here's her contact information. Have a chat with her, right? And figure out whether the how the dress can be modified and if it can be modified so that that's going to work. But I'm sorry, under hypnosis, I am not the right person to try to make your body fit into that dress in any time frame, much less like a bunch of weeks, right? And literally the person deflated. And they're like, oh, but I thought that we could do this. And I'm like, I am not the person. I don't fit, right? I can, some cases I had to fix the boyfriend story and I was the right person. In this case, I'm like, I am not the right person, right? And for me,
Yeah.
that's super important, right? And the next part of it is, if I think I'm the right person, right, to work with, do I have the requisite tools, experience, and feel that we're going to get to where they want to go? Now, there's a caveat to that. Where their conscious mind thought they wanted to go versus where they need to be is another like esoteric dynamic to this, right? Because if our conscious mind could conceive of where we need to be, then we could just walk there, right? We could just go there.
Well,
But our conscious
then you have
mind
to deal
might-
with the unconscious.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
well,
either
and
way,
the-
you're dealing with the unconscious.
all these, well, so here's the thing, right? In the last minute, how many times did you breathe?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Less than
I
20.
wasn't
But do
counting.
you doubt that you did breathe?
No, I can feel that I was breathing at like I can tell you like the rate I was breathing, but like I can't tell you like exactly how many breaths.
Yeah. So some part of you was managing your breath,
Yeah.
Subconscious.
right? And so here's the thing. Breath is an example of a thing that we can be consciously aware of, and we can actually take conscious control of it really easy, right? You go to many modalities and they're like, take a breath, let it out, right? Because it's one of the unconscious normally things that we can take conscious control of. And then when we're distracted, oh, hey, shiny, we don't forget to breathe, right? Something takes over again and keeps us breathing, right? But if we extend that to things that we are less conscious of, right? What's your heart rate? Right? How often is your heart pumping? Can you change that rate? Right? Can you slow down your heart rate? Or can you bring it up? Right? Most of us know we can go to the gym, right? I don't have to go to the gym. We just run to the gym, right? And our heart rate will change, right? All of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, I feel our heart rate's different, right? Most of us, unless you've had some training, can't change our heart rate just by thinking about it, right? I can't often change my heart rate just by like, oh yeah, I'd like my heart rate to slow down. I can learn to do that sometimes, right? But I don't have direct control over that. If we take it into the more esoteric, right? Our body has lymph, right? This fluid that circulates through our body, right? And sometimes there's nodes, and lymph nodes can get blocked up, right? They can need some attention, right? And so some part of us is circulating that lymph, right? And most of us don't have an awareness that the lymph system exists, much less the rate at which it's moving, much less the, oh, my lymph nodes are feeling off today. I need to shift that, right? It's not a common thing that we have in our awareness, right? So there are these levels of things going on, right? And I've talked about very physical things, but there's emotional, there's spiritual, right? At different levels, right? And so back to the fix my boyfriend, right? We've got this story that's been running for decades about an interaction with a parent. And I'm not blaming the interaction with the parent. Lots of things that shape our adult life happen before the age of 7, give or take. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, but in general, single digits, right? Things happen. And would we want to change that? No, because kind of we need to get through single digits to get to double digits, right? It's the way we grow up. But the way our bodies and our minds build those things into us shape who we are. And many of those things shape us into the person that we are, right? But occasionally, some of those things shape us into that aspect of who we are that's problematic. And those are the ones that we want to shift.
Psycho